Now, you know Poirier really well. Obviously, you were at ATT for a long time when he was at, I think he still is at ATT. Statistically, they're not all that different as fighters, but I think in practice they are. How do you size up this one? And in particular, what is Poirier's main task in this fight?
I think Poirier's main task is to not get caught early, and that is, and that's the two ways this fight can go. This fight can go because Chandler's so explosive. I mean, he's the better athlete, and Poirier has traditionally had trouble with guys that were faster than him. If you look back at his record, and it goes all the way back to Jason Young, Michael Johnson, and Connor the first time, all these guys were faster than him, and he struggled with that. And if he has that problem against Chandler, he may get knocked out early. So he's got to start a little slower than normal and be defensive and get Chandler to get wild, which Chandler will, because I don't think Chandler's fighting for championships. I think Chandler's fighting for excitement and to build fans. So I think Chandler's going to come hard, come fast, and try to maintain that the whole time. So Poirier's got to be careful with that. So I think Poirier's biggest concern is to not get caught early, get this fight into a rhythm in which he's comfortable, and try to box Chandler.
And if you're,
that sounds like,
go ahead, BC.
That sounds like a great strategy on paper, right? But the problem with this fantastic group of aging all-action lightweights, some of them former interim champions, most of them have challenged for the belt, the Gaethjes, the Chandlers, the Poiriers. I mean, this we're coming off that incredible 155 era. These guys are still around. It sounds great practice to, hey, let's avoid the sex right away. But you hang it on a bait, on a fishing rod. I mean, Michael Chandler comes out with his rod exposed, just hanging it there. I don't know if Dustin Poirier can avoid that when things get hot and heavy on a platform this big. And, we could even argue that the winner could be in line for a title shot, specifically Chandler, who keeps pushing it. So when you're saying Poirier needs to avoid that, are we going the level of a shoot? Are we going the level of a takedown? How does Dustin Poirier avoid that when Michael Chandler's coming out guns blazing?
Well, he's got to really avoid throwing punches early. That's it. He's got to be really defensive early, use his footwork and shell up early, and not throw a lot of punches early, and just be on defensive mode early. I mean, really, that's it. He can't really throw anything more than one punch at a time, probably just a jab, and do that early. Because I'm telling you, Chandler's coming hard. And we know this. Chandler is like, you know what, let's stand and trade and bang, because that's where Chandler's mind is at right now. Chandler's crying. He talks the whole title stuff, but I don't think he cares about that. I think he's trying to make as much money, trying to build his fan base up as much as he can, hang out with Grant Cardone, do all the fun stuff. But I don't see him taking on, trying to pace himself to win a strategic battle and fight a championship level fight. I don't see that happening. Now with Poirier has shown some maturity over the years. Like back in the day, Poirier would get sucked up into these brawls, but he showed some maturity over the years, and I think that he may be able to continue to show that now.
All right, so Dean, if you're Dustin Poirier and your job early is to not get caught, obviously you can't just be entirely defensive, but you have to be much more defensively minded. Let's look to the second round, maybe even the beginning of the third, where it's really time to open up. Once it is time to open up, what kind of openings does Chandler leave?
I mean, Chandler leaves a lot of openings. I mean, Chandler's not very defensive at all. And especially the older Chandler got, I think the more reckless he got. He's not very defensive at all. And I think that Poirier, especially if he starts using leg kicks and beating up the legs of Chandler early, it's like that's another strategy he can use, the jab, movement, and leg kicks. If he starts to do that early, he can get Chandler to start reaching and start making a lot of bad mistakes, because Chandler will make a lot of bad mistakes the later the fight gets. And that's kind of historically been his thing, is that he makes a lot of mistakes. If you look back in even his days of Bellator, he don't mind making mistakes because he's normally able to compensate for the mistakes because of how athletic and how fast and quick he is. He can make some mistakes. But against a guy like Poirier, who is a legit finisher, let's face it. If Poirier gets you hurt, he's going to finish you. Let's face that. If Poirier can just get him hurt, if he can wear on him, be defensive in the first round, second round, wear on him and hurt him, then the third round, he can put him away. But if he can't get out of that first round without getting hurt, Poirier won't finish.
How do you?
Well, Dean, that's my.
Go ahead, BC.
Sorry, Luke. That's my fear for DP here is the mileage. Obviously, when you're in so many wars and so many of his great victories were fantastic wars, right? Max Holloway, Dan Hooker, another sleepy 5-round war. Not to mention Gaethje, Alvarez twice, so many of them. Considering, look, I thought he was going to go in there and beat Charles Oliveira, and that's a credit to the run that Charles Oliveira just put together. It became dramatic and historical out of nowhere. But is there a way to look back at the recent run, and especially those 2 McGregor fights for Poirier, and wonder if there's a little bit of fool's gold in there, considering McGregor's long layoffs, look, he's not what he once was, to the idea that at that point, beating McGregor twice in a row, coming into the title shot, I'm like, this guy's a Hall of Famer, an all-timer, he's in the pound for pound. I mean, this guy is everything. He went in there and he lost to Charles Oliveira. Full respect. When you're putting 2 guys together who you know are going to go after it later in their career, which this matchup screams that, is there fear that Poirier's a little bit more potentially shop-worn than Chandler and maybe more than we realize entering this? I know it's a delicate subject, but it's part of the breakdown looking into who's going to be the last man standing when these 2 throw.
You know what? I don't think physically he's that much shop-worn. I think that in training, he's done a really good job of protecting himself in training and not doing these big, hard camps and, going back to Louisiana and just, rolling around with his buddies. I think he's done a good enough job outside of the octagon of preserving his body and not putting a lot of mileage on it. But mentally is where it really comes to play. I mean, this guy's been doing this a long time. And I think mentally that we don't factor that in sometimes, but mentally fighters can just lose a little bit of steam. They get older, they lose testosterone, they have families, they have daughters, like Poirier has a daughter. And early it's easy to fight for her, but then eventually you're like, you just want to be dad and go to, and, start dressing her for prom. So like some of those things can play a factor. Now, from our perspective, when we look at these guys like Poirier and Chandler, sometimes we base them on their reputation of what they've done and not where they're at in their careers right now. So it's hard to tell where Poirier is in his career right now, because if you look at his fight against, Dan Hooker, that's a fight I thought he probably should have put Hooker away, but he wasn't able to. And then he lost to Charles Oliveira. And not only did he lose to Charles Oliveira, but he showed a lot of hesitation. Like he didn't even open up his guard to get off of his back. Like those are signs that show that, mentally, here's a guy who's not the same dog that he used to be. He could be slowing down a little bit. So those are factors that we have to kind of incorporate when we analyze this fight. Now for Michael Chandler, it's different because Michael Chandler is an entertainer. We have to factor that in. He is an entertainer. So while he may not be a dog and a killer at times, he's still always going to try to entertain. So those are the factors that we have to put in. Michael Chandler's always going to entertain, and Poirier's always going to try to win. But I don't think the killer instinct may be there like it used to be.
Is a finish a virtual guarantee in that fight, or is there a real chance it actually goes the distance?
No, I think there's a real chance it actually goes the distance. And the reason why there's a chance it can go the distance is I think Chandler can burn a lot of time with a takedown. Now, if it stays on the feet, I see it being a finish. But I think Chandler will look for takedowns and will burn some time with takedowns. And if he can burn time with takedowns, obviously that eliminates time on the feet and lessens the chances of a knockout. But I see Chandler doing that. I don't see Chandler standing up with him the whole time. I think Chandler's going to realize he can't really box with Poirier if it turns into a boxing match, and Chandler's going to look for some takedowns.